welcome back to Sextras,
where we talk about sex and all the extras.
I'm Honey.
And I'm Maria.
Do you want to say your name?
Oh, I'm Kabir.
And yeah, today, clearly, we're going to be talking to Kabir.
Our first guest in the studio.
Yeah, so exciting.
Which studio it is. I don't know.
We've had him sitting here for like an hour while we, have like a million problems with everything.
We love some technical difficulties.
Of course.
Yeah. It just adds a little bit of fun to the whole process. Makes you feel at ease.
Exactly.
Today we're going to talk about BPD and just general queerness.
So what it's like to be a mentally ill fag and have sex.
Yeah.
Can I say that? Is that fine? Can I say fag?
You can say whatever you want. We're super excited. I met you. Well, I don't know if you guys have ever met before, but I met Kabir when we were like 15 probably. And it was so strange. I remember just like Hannah and Amy, our friends, summoning me to go and meet you. They were like, "Oh, you're going to meet Kabir today," and I was like, "Oh, am I? Okay."
God, did I need like a forewarning?
No, I think it was
Just a
literally
warning.
an hour before. Like, okay, you're going.
You're going.
This is
This
the
is
location.
what you're doing today.
God,
Yeah.
That makes me sound so scary.
Yeah, it was scary. I was like, I don't know who this person is.
It sounds like a fucking drug cartel, and it's like when you finally make it through the final round,
exactly.
you will be meeting Kabir today.
Yeah.
God, that makes me feel like a mob boss. I love that. I grew up on mafia films. That just fulfills my fantasy.
So much
I'm here
power.
for that.
But then I got there and I was like, okay, I feel like this isn't as scary as it was made
Who's
out
this
to
piece
be.
of shit?
I was like, why the fuck am I here?
Fair enough.
No, I'm joking. But yeah, so, and then we've only seen each other like a handful of times since then, but I feel like this is the perfect opportunity to catch up. So yeah, we didn't do a segment for this episode, but we're just gonna get into it. We have a lot to say, so
Cool.
Yeah, so should we start by just talking a bit about BPD? That was going to be the main theme, but now we have so many things that we want to talk about. So we heard you on Back from the Borderline, which is why we wanted to have you on. So go check that out as well. It's a really good podcast. But can you tell us a little bit about your experience with BPD, how it manifests itself?
Yeah. So BPD, borderline personality disorder, essentially how I view it now is a pattern of frameworks and just routines that I developed as a child in order to survive, which now don't really work nowadays. But it's a lot more complicated than that because it manifests itself in a lot of different ways, varying from person to person. But according to the DSM-5, which is like the Diagnostics Manual for Mental Health, they have 9 different criteria, and if you meet, I think, at least 5 of them, then you can be diagnosed with BPD. So that can manifest itself as, and what it most typically manifests itself in is attachment issues and abandonment issues, impulsive and reckless behavior, whether that comes to how you have sex, how you spend, how you kind of live your entire life. It's a very extreme, unstable emotion. It's a lot of different things, but sorry, I'm kind of like freezing up. So it manifests itself in a lot of different ways with a lot of different symptoms, and it's typically developed from early onset childhood trauma or stuff like that, where either neglect, abuse, trauma, but it can be in a variety of different ways. It's not necessarily just in the whole like I had a really shit upbringing, because the way in which we react and respond, especially as children, to even menial or smaller things can have such a big impact. So I think it really can come out of nowhere and really spring up on people out of nowhere. And I was born a very sensitive child anyway, so I think I was definitely like primed to be mentally ill, and it just happened to be borderline personality disorder that kind of affected me. But that's how I would describe it.
Okay, so, and does it kind of change depending on like who you're with, day to day?
Massively. So it can change in like 5 seconds. Like I would say, I mean, not to compare mental illnesses, but I would definitely be like, BPD is a lot like how people would view bipolar disorder, except instead of having like manic states and down states that can last days, it's like that, but within the space of 5 minutes. So it really affects how you have relationships, and it can really affect who you're with, and how it manifests is really depending on the surroundings that you're in. So a lot of the time, people with BPD suffer from having a shifting sense of identity, which means that a lot of the time, what they enjoy, their opinions, their basic sense of self can be very, very fickle and malleable. And that means, fine, on the bright side, they can be really adaptive, but it means a lot of the time, when they're trying to win the affections of someone, you very much find yourself changing and almost mirroring that person a lot of the time, whether it's interest, music taste, the way in which you dress, the way in which you communicate. Because BPD fundamentally is an illness or a personality disorder that depends on your relationships both with other people and with yourself. It's a lot less, I mean, it's a lot of what's going on in here, but it's a lot less just what's going on in here, and a lot more about how I communicate and interact with the world around me that affects my mental illness.
What, like, differentiates just, like, a normal person? Because, like, a lot of things we were kind of talking a bit before, like, this whole TikTok mania of, like, everyone's fucking diagnosing themselves with everything, and, like, what's different from, like, someone that's just, like, quite impulsive, or, like, a lot of the things that you described. I know you said you have to have at least 5 of the criteria, but, like, as someone that actually has BPD, like, how would you say it sort of differs?
How it differs
from just a normal, not normal.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. From like
a non-BPD person.
A non-BPD person. I think it's more like the intensity and the extremes to which they can occur. So it's the kind of levels of sadness or the levels of happiness over the most menial things. Like, someone can look at me the wrong way, and that can throw my day off. Or I can get a text from the right person, and I will be like I will be acting like I just fucking won the Olympics, kind of thing. And it's that level of extremes. It's very black and white thinking. It's very much like a pendulum swinging from one end to the other. And I think it's the speed and intensity at which they happen, which is so characteristic of BPD. And it's also like, you can be impulsive and stuff like that, but it's actively putting yourself, impulsivity to the point where it's reckless and very, very harmful. And a lot of the time it's fine to escape a feeling. A lot of the time it's just because I feel like doing something. But yeah, I think the way in which it differentiates from your average kind of neurotypical person is just the intensity and that lack of stability with it all.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so, like, how have you found that it sort of shows itself in, like, dating and relationships specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things, especially when it comes to sex, is that for so long I was using sex as a form of self-harm. So, and I think a lot of people do it anyways. But when you have BPD, you are really prone to finding ways to harm yourself. And I think, especially at points where I was going through really depressive periods where I was just getting fucked up, I would sleep with just about anyone because I needed A, that kind of validation for myself, but B, also, like, it's something you're going to regret. It's fucking you up. So I would throw myself out there and put myself in risky, stupid, dangerous situations, especially with having an app like Grindr, making sex so accessible and so easy to have. It was really easy to put myself in vulnerable, tricky positions. But also, on the flip side, when it comes to more like dating and stuff like that, it's really easy to get incredibly infatuated with someone really easily. It's really easy to become obsessive, to favorite person someone. But on the flip side, that's the negative. I think people with BPD, because you spend so long trying to learn how to please other people and seek that validation. I've never met a person with BPD who's bad in bed, which is the best part.
Love that.
No, but because I think you spend so much time trying to figure out how to give pleasure, because that's how you find validation in yourself, because you are essentially seeking approval. You just figure out how to be good at giving, getting, you know what I mean?
Giving and getting.
Yeah. And then, but also it means that people with BPD, when they're living healthily, can love incredibly hard. It means their sense of loyalty, the sense of connection you can build with someone with BPD is unlike any other, I would say, because there is a huge amount of compassion, empathy, love and loyalty, and it is to such an extreme level that as long as it's healthy and as long as it's kept to a healthy level, it can be some of the most, like, the relationships I have with people are some of the most beautiful things in my life. And I largely credit the fact that my brain's a bit more enthusiastic with my emotions for a lot of that. So yeah.
But you talked about how it can change, like your emotions can change from one extreme to the other. How does that affect relationships?
Okay, so basically there's this thing with BPD called splitting, which is the idea that like it's similar to like black and white thinking. And when you split on a person, you kind of switch between idealizing them and massively demonizing them. And it can like switch over the smallest of things. So like, for example, one of my friends a couple of weeks ago, I was meant to see them, and she like didn't hit me back. We made plans, and immediately, just because I don't get that text, I'm like, fuck this bitch. And I'm not even like genuinely angry with her. It's like, how dare she fucking disrespect me. The second she was like, yeah, sorry, I was just really tired and passed out, I was like, oh, it's okay, babe, like, it's fine. But it's that kind of extreme switch from you're the best person ever, I idealize you, to such an unhealthy extent to you are now literally Satan. That makes it really hard to manage a lot of the time with relationships. And I don't want to overly stigmatize it, but like every person with BPD is like that, because I'm talking at a very baseline level, and you do learn how to manage your things. You do, through therapy, just through age and learning how to deal with your symptoms, you become a lot better at identifying your own emotional chaos and being like, I'm not going to let this actually affect me in my real life. But we're talking about completely untreated, running rampant BPD. Yeah, it really affects relationships, because it can make you paranoid, it can make you nervous, it can make you the most loving person, but it can also make you switch up on a person so incredibly quickly. And I think loving someone with BPD requires a lot of patience, a lot of compassion, and a lot of reassurance more than anything. I think people with BPD more often not just need that little bit of reassurance. But yeah.
It sounds like, I don't know, because when you're younger as well, obviously, regardless of whether you have BPD or any kind of like mental or personality disorder or illness, whatever you want to call it, it's that's really annoying. It's fuck, I just like got distracted. I'm sorry.
When you're younger.
Yeah, when you're younger. It's the feelings that you have are already so intense, and also you know so little about dating. You don't know how to put words to things like attachment theory. If I had known that when I was 16, that literally would have saved my life. But you don't know how to understand why other people are acting a certain way. So I think especially being queer as well, like on top of it all, you've got the
becomes
Holy
a little
Trinity.
bit of a clusterfuck. It's really fun. But,
so yeah, I can imagine it's like, even just from like someone else's trying to understand you point of view, and then you trying to mirror the other person is like a whole complex.
It's very complicated. And I think so. This is why you can't get diagnosed with a personality disorder before the age of 18, because they're like, so many of the symptoms of having BPD, all personality disorders, just like impulsivity, reckless behaviors, shifting sense of identity, all of those are kind of just like, isn't that also puberty, babes?
Yeah.
Like, so that's why they can only diagnose you after you're 18, which in some, at least in the UK, I'm not really sure about how it is elsewhere, but in some regards that's great, because obviously we don't want to go around giving labels to every 15-year-old who thinks they're slightly off kilter, TikTok. But at the same time, had I had my diagnosis years in advance, it would have made it a lot more easier, because I could have got the right therapy, I could have learned how to manage those skills a lot earlier than I have.
Yeah.
And now it feels like, A, especially being queer, but B, having to deal with BPD, which affects how I interact with people. But C, also just having a mental illness, which means that you suffer from depression, anxiety, blah, blah, blah. You enter your 20s or your like late teens and you're like, I'm now playing emotional catch-up. I'm playing relational catch-up, because I've not had time to focus on what my interests are sexually, what I enjoy, what I'm looking for in a person, because I've been too busy just trying to stay alive and seek that kind of validation from other people, and seek that, not validation, but it's, you don't want to be abandoned. It's the most ridiculous fear of abandonment that, you know, for example, when you come back from like a date and it's like, oh my God, I hope they like me. So often, more often than not, I kind of forget to ask myself, but did I like them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like that. I think you're so hyper focused on, do they like me? You forget to ask yourself the questions of, do I like them? What do I like? What's important to me? Because you're so afraid of losing any potential thing that can come into your life, that it makes it a lot more difficult to communicate on a very open level. B, become terrified of pushing that person away, scaring them. I feel like I'm really giving people BPD a bad rap. Like, they can be great in relationships. But at least from like the mental processes behind it, yeah, that's what happens. And I think for a lot of people, that's a very relatable experience. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's why, like, things like diagnosis, not to, like, put everyone in a box and things like that, but, like, when you have an explanation and, like, you can, like, see it, something that you're doing and you're like, oh no, this is just a symptom. Like,
exactly.
It's not, and then you can, as you said, choose to not act on it, or, like, choose to not...
Well, knowledge is power.
Exactly.
That's the thing. I think that's the biggest thing with BPD, so I understand why they don't diagnose you before you're 18. But at the same time, had I been able to be like, this is what's going on with me, this is, I can identify, this isn't necessarily who I am, but it's an emotion that I'm having, and being able to be like, okay, well, I know this isn't rational, I know why this isn't rational, I know how to now make sense of that, and I know where this pain or this emotion is coming from. Now I can deal with it and handle it maturely. So now when I catch myself obsessing over someone or something, it's a lot easier for me to pull myself out of it and be like, hey, this is fucked up. Like, this is irrational, this isn't good for me. I know why I'm doing this, and it's because I'm repeating unhealthy patterns from my past. And as much as it feels like I should do this because it's all I've ever been trained to do, by doing a different action, I'm retraining myself, making my relationships better with other people, and I'm making my own mental health better.
Yeah.
But it's tricky, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of like providing the guidelines for how to like therapize yourself in a weird way.
Completely that.
Can you, if you don't mind, can you tell us a bit about like an example of a relationship and how that's happened and how you've, I don't know if you've
how
used
how it's effective. Yeah. I think the best example to give then is probably, it wasn't even a relationship, but it's the first time I've ever had strong feelings for someone. I was like 13, and I really fell for one of my close friends who was also gay. And it was like, it lasted about like 2.5 years, and it was the most intense, obsessive infatuation where I was like, I'm completely in love, but it became so much of my identity to the point that I found myself bringing it up in every conversation. I was like, you know that bit in Mean Girls when Katie is like, I couldn't stop myself from talking about Regina. It was like word vomit. It was like that, but in every single conversation. And it was like, whenever we'd get into a fight, if they would like block me for the day, I would probably send them like 100 messages, be like, they're freaking out, crying, hyperventilating. I like this kid so much that if people made jokes about it, I would just, especially because I was 13, puberty, kind of just off a really shitty period with my family at that time. There was a lot going on in my emotional world that to attach to something and find someone that I could latch onto was the best thing ever. And it was someone who really cared about me, who emotionally I know had also fallen for me to an extent, but it was like insane. And like, I don't know how else to describe it. It was the most all-encompassing toxic thing because it just took over my entire life, and it meant that I made myself overly vulnerable. I didn't respect myself, and I'd put myself in situations. I think that's one of the biggest things with BPD and relationships is learning boundaries and self-respect, because it becomes really hard to put those boundaries in place. But a lot of the time when you're looking for love, or you're looking for affection, you're willing to let a lot of shit slide because you don't want to lose that person, and you don't want to scare them off or set up boundaries, which is like, hey, no, this is inappropriate. And I think learning to realize that in those moments I'm disrespecting myself, even if it doesn't feel like I am because I so desperately want something, that's been the biggest way in which like relationships for me now have changed. Because now I'm able to be like, okay, this is a step too far. No matter how much I may want that person or I want them in my life, I recognize that this is me disrespecting myself. This is me disrespecting the boundaries. I know that I'm worth more than this. But back then it was the exact opposite. It was, I would cancel holidays so I could see this person. I would be obsessed, and they would cancel on me, and I'd go fucking insane. But I would bend over backwards. I would do anything. I mean, and that was never reciprocated. But the feeling was so much. And then when I got told they didn't like me back, or when I knew that it wasn't going to work out, it was like a bullet to the chest. Like, it was the most, like, it felt like a death. kind of thing, because so much of what I built myself up around and so much of my current identity at the time, which was just an obsession with this person, had completely been torn away from me.
Yeah.
And so I felt aimless, and I'm trying to get over that person. It wasn't so much I'm just trying to get over them. It was, I've forgotten who the fuck I am. Because my entire life, every waking moment, thought, conversation has either been, I'm really depressed because I was dealing with mental health issues, or I'm in love with this person.
Yeah.
And for 2 whole years of doing that, I hit 15 and I was just like, 16 or whatever, and I was just like, whoa. Slow the fuck down. But yeah, I think it's definitely impacted relationships in that sense. That it can make it very easy to find myself, A, disrespecting my own boundaries, but B, infatuated with someone.
So do you think your diagnosis is what made that switch between realizing that was completely unhealthy, or do you think it was just like a process of time? I mean, I guess it can be a combination.
I think it's both, because I think, one, I've grown up a lot. Like, it's been 9 years since that one incident, but that doesn't change the fact that I still, very rarely now, but like very occasionally, I'll be like, I find myself obsessing over a guy. But now having the diagnosis and having, the power of that knowledge of understanding I'm repeating abandonment issues from my past, of understanding this isn't rational, this isn't some intense, beautiful love. This is you just being a bit like, off your rocker.
Yeah, like you're not in love with them, you're
exactly.
just mentally ill.
No, completely. And it's like, it's like, more often than not, I'm not in love with you, I'm in love with the idea of you that I placed in my head, and this idea of you is one that is ultimately fueled by not narcissism, but none of what I'm obsessed with right now has anything to do with that other person. It's all about, I find it so difficult to love myself at this point, so how can I love myself through aggressively projecting that onto another person?
Yeah.
And I think having the knowledge of that makes it so much easier for me to be like, okay, well, that's all bullshit. Let me center it back on myself. Let me have those conversations with myself to self-soothe myself and at least make the situation easier and more manageable. But at the same time, I think knowing that I can get so obsessive means that, like, since that one boy, which was 9 years ago, I think I've probably genuinely had a crush on or liked 2 or 3 boys since then in the last 9 years.
Oh, wow.
I find it, so I can date, I can do that, I have a lot of fun doing that. But liking someone to the point where I'm like, I think I've somewhat closed myself off.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it takes a lot of energy to, like, I don't
It's
think
draining.
even 3 times sounds like a lot for that kind of
It's
intensity.
fucking intense. And like, only one of them was like an actual relationship, and that was like the only boyfriend I've ever had. And looking back, it was like we were only together for like 3 or 4 months, and I got broken up with the day before my A-level started, which was so fucking inappropriate.
That's so not okay.
No, he was year below, so I think we can give him a pass there. And
so he didn't understand.
He
the
didn't
struggle
understand.
of
But I wouldn't have got the grades I did if it weren't for that breakup. So thank you for breaking up with me before my A-level started. But I kind of look back on it like 8 months later, and I was just a bit like, I didn't know you. Like, it was very much like training wheels relationship, like training wheels boyfriend, but it was just like, I found you really, really hot. And that was enough for my infatuation to start going off, because I was like, I didn't really get to know you. I didn't really get to know your friend. What I was obsessed with was this image of you, which was someone who I found really, really attractive, who was just in my bed on Saturday morning, kind of thing. Who was there, and I kind of view, and I hate to admit this, but I look back and I'm like, in that relationship, I essentially just treated you like a Birkin bag. Like, I treated you like like the hottest new little accessory that I could go about town being like, look at this, like, little, and kind of being able to project whatever parts of my own personality I wanted to on this person, because I didn't know them well enough at that point. And it was just the excitement of someone cares about me, someone's there for me, and it's someone that I find really, really hot. And so, yeah, I think it's kind of, it's interesting because every relationship I have now, every interaction, romantic, sexual, friendship, all of them are kind of, you learn from the other.
Yeah.
Our brains work by referencing old data, by referencing our past and building up expectations of the future based on what we've gone through. So learning and having the awareness of the diagnosis allows me to get to a point where I'm creating new data for myself to learn of. So by having those conversations where I'm like, this is unhealthy, this and that, even if they're one-off instances, I'm creating new examples for my brain to then refer to which means that in future going forward, I can treat myself better and therefore treat the other person I'm in a relationship with a lot better too.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
So other than like being diagnosed and learning more about it and like how you experience BPD, what else like have you learnt to sort of help you in those very
intense
moments? Yeah.
I think kind of the most important thing is having a good support network and just having actually, no, between me, forget about that. Between me and the other person, the most important thing I can have is open and honest communication, and I think that is so much harder than it sounds.
Oh yeah.
And I think we all talk about how like, communication is key, and you're like, guys, just talk about it. But it's like in the heat of it, in the heat of those emotions, in the heat of the kind of fear of abandonment, it's really hard to say, hey, no, these are my needs, and this is how I'm feeling. And I think all to have a successful and very loving relationship with someone with BPD, all that's required is a little bit extra communication and being willing to take those steps of, hey, I'm just checking in, or what's going on in your mind, or hey, I can tell something's up. But from my end, it's also about being a lot more like, this is making me uncomfortable. This did upset me. Which is something that I think I find very hard to do, because it's very easy for me to be like, oh, don't worry about it, babes, it's fine. Because once the situation is resolved, my emotional, because my emotions change so much, it's very, when I'm like really angry and sad in the moment, but the second it's over, I'm like, fine. A lot of the time it's difficult for me to be like, actually, no, this did upset me, because I'm feeling fine now. And nothing ever really feels permanent, because when you have BPD, you have this thing called a lack of emotional permanence, which means that you can literally, like I've said, switch from one emotion to the other, but it's almost as if like the previous emotion never happened.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think in that respect it becomes really difficult, but also because of that perceived fear of abandonment, it becomes really hard to be like, treat me differently.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of it is about learning to have those conversations and learning how to communicate, even when it's really difficult, even if you don't want to. Because more often than not, the stuff that I'm really struggling to say and get out is met with such a kind, understanding response of, hey, I get it, that makes sense. And B, when it's not met with that kind of response, is that person worth my time anyway? Like, no. So, I forgot what the question was, but there's my answer. There we go.
So you know how you were saying that BPD affects like your identity because you kind of like mold it a little bit. So like, how did that interact with your queerness and like when you were kind of just finding out about it? Well, not finding out about it, but you know what, like being queer, that's what I mean.
I think, well, the thing is that you get a lot of people who do have BPD tend to engage in not more promiscuous sex than they do, but that's not related to queerness. They are more likely to be queer or have queer relationships, and I think that's just because they are more impulsive and therefore more willing to try stuff. But for me, and also I think the queer community has a lot of trauma in it, so there's no surprise that people who are more likely to be traumatized are more likely to have mental illnesses that are the direct result of trauma. But I think for me it was quite lucky in the way that they didn't really interact. So I've been like dealing with mental health issues since I was about like 10, which was when I first had my like first serious bout of like what I would call like depression. But at the same time, I've kind of always known that I was into boys. Like I always say, I came out my mum's vagina and I said I'm never going back in one of those again. But at the same time, like I think because of that lack of a sense of identity, when I did come out, I latched on to the only kind of representation of queerness I had ever really seen, which was being the bitchy gay, the Regina George-esque gay, the very kind of... And because I didn't really know where I fell in that space between masculine and feminine, and because the kind of conversation wasn't around when I was 13 about masculinity and femininity and gender roles, it was this really weird thing where, because I'd come out so early, especially at a time where you're finding out who you are, I spent so much of my time playing up a stereotype or a character that I used almost as a defense mechanism and almost as a way to protect myself. And I think this is the case for a lot of queer people, regardless of mental illness or not.
I was going to say that.
That they then spend their late teens and early 20s untangling who they actually are from however they've had to present themselves, whether that's in the closet, whether that's out in their early years.
Yeah.
So it's been an interesting intersection of the two. And I think especially now being in more queer circles, being in more queer communities, you get so many different types of like gays, if you know what I mean. You get like, your Soho gays, your techno gays, your like stoner gays. And so I think the shifting sense of identity kind of really affects me now, where it's like 1 minute I'm like, I'm a techno gay, and then like a week later I'm like, I'm a stoner gay. And you can see me like, you can like go through my Etsy or like even my like Apple Music library, and you can see what I was like, you can see like what identity I had chosen that week. And like I've settled on like 3 or 4, and they're all pretty fun.
That's fun.
But like you can kind of see like, oh, Kabir's going through a new phase because she'll change up the outfit, she'll change up the clothing, she'll change up the... And it's not intentional, because I do kind of genuinely do fall in love with it. It's not like I'm faking anything, but it's like you kind of go so full force on these things. Like and then next week I'm like, no, I want to be something else now. While still fundamental, but now I think it's got to a point where I can pick up things that I really enjoy, and I can take parts from the different identities I get to explore, and I use that to form a more fully formed version of myself. And I think that's only because as you grow up, you learn more about your mental health diagnosis, but B, it's because I've become a lot more comfortable in my queerness. And I would say that's been the biggest thing for both me helping me find my own sense of identity, but also alleviating a lot of the symptoms of my BPD has been kind of coming to terms with becoming a lot more comfortable with my own queerness. Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, it sounds like quite, in a way, like maybe your like part of it is just figuring out that your identity might be like, I am just the kind of person that just likes to try out different things, and like, as you said, take what I can from each, and like there's not necessarily anything wrong with being like, oh, this week I'm like this kind of person. It's like, you're just a versatile person, like
in more ways than one. Yeah, no, I mean, completely, like, and so much of that, like I was saying, has only been alleviated by coming to terms with my queerness. So the best kind of analogy for that is gender. So I'm non-binary. I go by he, they, but only out of kind of like ease, and because it's just easier if I go by he, they for 99% of the population, which really is a bad thing for you to... Anyway, point aside, in the same way that I don't view masculinity or femininity as two specific things, like they are constructs, but I just am. I have too much shit going on to be like, how do I fit in to this side of masculinity, or how do I fit into this side of femininity? I just am, and wherever people want to place me along that line is where they choose to place me. But some days I wake up and the way I dress, the way I express myself is a lot more androgynous. Some days it's a lot more feminine. Some days it's a lot more masculine. And that, all of those are still me. They're very different sides of me, and they express themselves in very different ways, but they are still fundamentally all me. And so in a very similar way to that, as long as I'm still the same person, as long as my values, the way my moral compass is still the same, and my opinions and my principles stay the same, as far as I'm concerned, that shifting sense of identity has just become one of the most beautiful things, because it's allowed me to learn more about myself and explore different facets of my personality, things that I enjoy. And yeah, there is an advantage to being willing to throw yourself so headfirst into something, because I don't know as many people who, and I'm not to toot my own horn, but like who, I mean, I would if I could.
You should.
Yeah, but I don't know as many people who would be as comfortable in such a different variety of circumstances with such a different variety of people as I may necessarily be. Not because I'm a different person or I completely change who I am, but because I've learned how to enjoy different parts of my identity while still fundamentally staying grounded and remaining as myself. But that's something that I've only really learned through coming to terms with my queerness. And so, alright, do you mind if I just go on a rant?
No,
go.
And so one thing I've definitely learned, and like we were talking about this earlier when I was joking about gatekeeping queerness, is that I was very comfortable, like I've been very comfortable with the fact that I liked men. I like the same sex, people with penises, I guess. Actually, not even people, you know, whatever. Anyway, labels are confusing. But anyway, I realised I wasn't heterosexual at 13. Well, no, I knew it for much longer, but that's when I came out. That's when I was comfortable with it. But that has nothing to do with my queerness. The way that I feel comfortable in my own body, the way I feel comfortable dressing, expressing myself, speaking. That kind of... I think 13-year-old me wanted to be the most heteronormative gay man possible. And that has nothing to do with the fact that now I feel a lot more comfortable being very different, and queerness exists in relation to the fact that it is a separation from heteronormative society, from cisgender heteronormative society. So it's only through, I forgot what I was saying, but you got my point. I feel
like it can't fit into any one box.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, growing up in the the fucking, oh my god, why can I not speak? I'm actually getting so annoyed. Also, I'm like second guessing myself now, sorry. Growing up in like the sphere that we grew up in as well, I can imagine that, I mean, I already know from just like us being bisexual, but the fact that like there aren't that many people who are open about their sexuality.
You would kind of almost think, because it is such a bubble, that it would kind of be easier to be gay. And I think, fine, the one good thing is that because it was such a bubble, I had to deal with very little homophobia. Because it was, but because I was so attached to this Regina George-esque type of personality, because I went to an all-boys, very alpha male-esque school, I learned they can't scare me if I scare them first. So by being a massive bitch, it meant that everyone knew they couldn't be homophobic. So in that regard, it was great. But again, when you're surrounded by such heteronormativity, that is what you kind of are surrounded by. It's what you aspire to. It's what feels like the norm. It feels like that's what you want.
Yeah.
And I think especially because the spheres that we're in are in direct relation to having a certain amount of financial privileges and being in a certain part, meant that it felt really hard to break away from it.
Yeah.
And it felt really hard to kind of be willing to explore outside of that bubble of heteronormativity, especially not being your typical skinny white boy. And the thing is, if I was a skinny white boy when I was 15, I probably would have been like a lot of my friends who were like on Grindr from a really young age, kind of putting themselves out there in ways that weren't necessarily healthy or safe, and in a lot of ways were really damaging, but still allowed them to explore their queerness from a younger age.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, up until about the age of 17, 18, like most 90% of the hookups I'd ever had, or like any sexual experience I'd ever had been with, straight boys.
Yeah.
Or closeted boys. And at the time, that was really fun. It felt really naughty. It was like, ooh, like, guess who sucked off the straight boy? Or like, and now it's like, if a straight boy comes up to me and they like try and make a move, I'm like, baby, I don't have time for a closet case. I'm not your mother. I'm not your therapist. Go toss yourself off. Because I'm comfortable in myself now, and so the way in which I interact and have sex with people I'm just going on a massive tangent here, fuck. Has massively changed because I've become more comfortable with who I am, and as a result of that, it's changed who I'm willing to, not even willing to, who I want to have sex with.
Yeah.
Because I no longer want the like boarding school Eton type who just happens to suck dick on the side. But I no longer want the little posh white boy. I want someone who's a bit faggy and someone who doesn't, well, not necessarily even a bit faggy, but someone who is comfortable with playing around with these notions of gender and masculinity and femininity in a way that I am. Because I'll say that, I'm more masculine than all of my straight friends, but I'm still more femme than any of my girlfriends. And I think, and I want someone who can do the same, who can play with gender and play with that sense of identity in a way that's malleable and fun. Because I think that allows you to do so much more when it comes to your expression, to how you have sex, everything.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, and I think that, how you were saying, at first you were just with the straight guys, and now you're like, okay, no, I actually want to value myself and who I sleep with and whatever. I think that speaks to a lot of queer youth that just don't have the same opportunities and experiences that everyone else seems to be having at that age. And of course you want to get involved in any way 100%. You can. It's a scarcity, so it's you take it where you can get it, and that also affects so many people in terms of their self-esteem and their relationship to sex, because it's since I was just sleeping with whoever I fucking could because I didn't really have that many opportunities, it gives this message 100%. Of whoever wants me can take me kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it is learning to value yourself, and this is a big problem I think we have within the queer community, is the 15-year-olds who are running on Grindr and being hit on, or running on Twitter or wherever, and just being hit on by men who are significantly older, who are very predatory, and more importantly, who know they'll get away with it.
Yeah.
Because they can get away with it, because these kids are so vulnerable.
Yeah.
Because these kids are looking for that attention. But the thing is, things have changed so massively compared to even just when we were 13. Like, I
Really?
bumped into, so I have a friend who's a bit, my friend's little sister was telling me, like, things at St. Paul's are so different now, largely because of people like our age and our age group who were quite comfortable being queer in relatively heteronormative schools, ultimately has made a huge difference, because now there's literally like the gay group in every year. I love that. And you know what? They're the cool kids.
Yeah.
They're the ones running about running shit. In fact, they've all apparently got girlfriends. I'm like, that's a bit suspect. For a gay group. But okay. I'm not here to buy shame. We love some bisexuals. No, but I mean, like, it's so much more comfortable now. The conversation around it is so much more common. Like, it's so much more easier to come out now. There is so much less, I guess, machismo, like, to all of it. To that kind of environment. And it has become a lot more like I think when we were young, being the gay kid, or being the bi girl, being whatever, being the queer person, you were someone who existed alongside everyone else, but not necessarily integrated with everyone else.
Yeah.
In the way that we were the ones having to adapt our experience to fit that heteronormative narrative of what it is to grow up in this world. And nowadays, like, it's just as it's much more integrated in the way that the queer experience and the heterosexual experience, fine, is still very, very different, but they're a lot more intertwining than they used to be. It's not like we're going off on our separate lanes, finding our own queer circles, finding our own queer communities, and then having to go back into straight world, like I feel like a lot of us still have to do, and then kind of explain to our straight friends, like, how discourse, the way we communicate, the way we understand and view and exist, like, it's all a lot more meshed into one now. And so the experiences of a queer person, I think, are not going to be a lot more similar to that of a straight person, but they're going to be a lot more relatable and understanding, just because because straight people are now a lot more exposed to it.
Yeah.
Compared to how we were even like 5 years ago.
Yeah. I remember when we were at school and we both had girlfriends at the same time. I don't remember, like, anyone, I mean, maybe we just weren't aware of them, but I don't remember anyone in years above us having girlfriends or boyfriends, and, like, us being exposed to that. And it was very much like, not that we were, like, trailblazers, but, like, but because we were, like, very open about the fact that we were in relationships with girls and we would, like, kiss them at school, it was, like, a massive deal. Like, we were the ones that were, like, causing a riot because we, like, kissed our girlfriend on the playground or something.
Yeah, Stonewall who, we paved the way.
No, I threw the first brick out. It was me.
Just breaking down barriers in our private schools in West London.
In our West London little bubbles. But like, seriously, so my friend's sister, who I mentioned earlier, she literally told me the other day, like, she put me on her Instagram, and she was like, 3 St. Paul's boys messaged me, but like, oh my god, you're friends with Kabir. He's the reason I find it so much easy. I found it so much easier to come out, which for me was like,
oh my god,
I was like,
gay celebrity.
I was like, I'm gamers, guys. I'm gamers. I finally made it. But like, not like big up me, but it was like, I know that I was the first visibly queer person that I saw at St. Paul's, including at the years above me. And fine, there were queer people, there were people out in gay, but I was faggy.
You were
faggy with it. I was loud.
There was no hiding.
In your face. I was no hiding. And more importantly, there was no... I think I carried myself refusing to feel shameful about my sexuality. To the point where if you were homophobic to me, I would just bully you for 2 years. And like, that's the one advantage of having felt obliged to adhere to this bitchy kind of thing. It was like, you know, a gay dictatorship in the sense that it was like, you couldn't afford to be homophobic to me. Because I would be an arsehole back, and I wasn't afraid to be a massive arsehole back. But, like, I'm not gonna be, like... And, like, as much as I'm, like, I regret who I was when I was 15, 16, it's made it a lot easier for me to feel comfortable and confident about my sexuality now.
Yeah.
The idea, like, I think back to when I was, like, 13, or, like, 12, before I'd fully come out. And I would find it... Like, the idea of even just saying the word out loud, like, I'm gay, was such a weird... And I knew I liked men, but I couldn't vocalize it. Every time someone asked me, it kind of drove me that further bit back into the closet. And it's so weird comparing that time where I was just like, where I would literally tell people I'm either asexual or bisexual, because lying and saying that I was straight just sounded like bullshit coming out of my mouth. But it's like going from that to now, I mean, literally calling myself a fag like about 50 times in the space of 10 seconds. Like that's fucking growth. And that's growth that's only been necessitated by our queer elders that we have to look up to. And it's only because of what the work that they do in just being visibly queer and being comfortable with who they are that has made it easier for us to do that, which in turn now makes it a lot easier for 13, 14-year-olds to be really comfortable in their schools being very openly queer.
Yeah. So, do you think that, like, you know how you were saying when you kind of first came out and stuff, how you had a lot of experiences with straight boys and stuff, do you think it was because, like, you were one of the only, like, out kids?
100%.
Or does that also happen, like, with just straight guys behind the scenes? Well, straight guys
I mean,
behind
like,
the scenes.
I mean, it's not like I had like a million and one experience. It's not like every other guy you see I've given head to.
Yeah, no.
It's like 1 in every 3 guys.
Yeah.
But no, it happens more than you'd think. And like a lot of the time, like a lot of these boys, as far as I know, haven't done stuff with other guys or still identify as straight. And some of them are now out and bi, like years down the line, or gay. And yeah, I think it's A, there was a lack of other gay guys, but B, like, you know, even if there were like 5 other gay guys that I knew of at the age of 13, 14, like my dating pool of them, 5?
Yeah.
Whereas like heteronormative people have the other 50% of the population, and it's like my dating pool has 5. It's like 5. Like the dating pool has P in it. Like it's not like I'm not entering this. But and also I think you don't know how to have a relationship. You don't get to have that practice. Well, like people were like going around kissing every other boy or girl they could see when they were 13. You know, like capital VIPing that shit. I didn't have any of that. While all my friends were hooking up at house parties, like that's not the experience I had. And like, it's very different because I think there are times now where I'm running around and I'm acting like I'm 15, like kissing every pretty boy that I see in the club. And I'm like, okay, but like I get it at the same time. Like, I want to have like, I didn't get to have like a, like I have my celibacy and my like slutty phase all in the space of like a week. Like, and it just changes because you don't get to explore it or grow up with it in the same way that other people get to.
Yeah.
It's a completely alienating, often very lonely experience, but I think some people do better with it than others, and some people are lucky enough to find themselves in queer circles at young ages, and some people, like me, only really kind of discovered the queer community or found themselves as a part of it over the last, 2-3 years, which is post uni or or since uni, I guess. So yeah.
Yeah, it's weird because we our friendship group was very queer, but we kind of weirdly gravitated towards each other at like 15, and then we were saying earlier that we well, at least when I talk about queerness, definitely like on this podcast, I always idolize it so much, and I'm like, oh, but queer relationships are amazing. But actually, because you have such a narrow pool of like options, it's not that amazing because it's like they're your only option. Yeah. No offense to like the people that we had our first queer experiences with, because they were like, it was good in its own way. It served its purpose. Yeah, but it's still, you're so limited that like anything, you'll take anything.
The dating pool has pee in it. That's how I put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's messy. No, it is. It definitely is. And I think it's so weird now, because I know what you mean about queer people kind of gravitating towards each other, because a lot of my primary school friends who I was friends with then, obviously this being 11s, the concept of sexuality wasn't really as prevalent in my mind. So it actually definitely was. I was a little whore back then. But because this thing, I've been kind of playing doctors with boys since I was 5. And when I play doctors, we go into the ER, but
it's not just like the GP.
No, it ain't the GP, girl. This is the operating room. But which was I think obviously just 5-year-old Kabir trying to figure out what it is and if that's just kissing boys and stuff like that. But I think my parents caught me doing it one time, and I think just playing doctors with boys, and they fully and this was probably the most traumatic thing. Looking back, I'm like, no wonder this fucked up, like, just being queer for me for so long. They drove me to outside a police station. We're like, because I was doing a lot more than just kissing.
Wait, how old were you?
I was like, probably like, I was younger than 8.
Okay.
Like, being like, it's illegal, you can't be like kissing boys' buttholes or whatever, like, being like, and I was there like crying in tears, being like, don't send me to the police station. I was 8, like, I wasn't gonna know any better.
Oh no.
And so I think naturally, and I think also growing up in like a parents of like immigrants who were like Indian, it was a lot more was a lot more stigmatized. I think from like when I was younger, the idea that like 2 actors would kiss each other and they weren't in a relationship was like the most I was like, that's disgusting. Like, I definitely grew up like an overly moralized, like, very kind of Victorian sense of sexuality.
Yeah.
Which, like, even though now I'm a very sexually liberal person, I'm very open, you know, with it, I still like, there's still that stuff there that you have to untangle yourself from. And there is that kind of rigidity around around sex that took me a long time to overcome as well. I don't know how we got onto that, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely relate to that. I was literally telling Honey the other day, like, I feel like I'm such a conventional, liberal, open person because, like, so many, especially sex things, and, like, because I grew up very, like, Roman Catholic, also immigrant parents, like, so it's just, like, so many things. It's, like, I think it's completely fine, but, like, for me, myself, and I would never do it. Things like, well, I don't know. I don't know why sex before marriage came into my mind. I'm not against sex before marriage, but, like, I don't know, like abortion or things like that. I'm just so like, like very conventional in my, I don't know, not in my thinking because I really don't. Yeah. It's just in like
it's how it affects you on a personal
level.
Like
hold-ups that you kind of still have.
Yeah,
and, like,
exactly.
Things that you really don't realize because I'm so open about sex and like so open about certain things that like. Yeah.
Well, yeah, here we are.
But then again,
podcast.
like, yeah, you do catch yourself. Sorry.
Do you think that that's just kind of like? I feel like I always end up being the therapist. Do you think that's just you like overcompensating for like not overcompensating, but like trying to make up for like that those lack of things? Because I feel like I overshare because that's just how I was raised. But like you overshare, and I feel like it's on a different level of you like not like
I get what you're saying. Sorry.
Yeah, like not making up for stuff, but like. You're just trying to like get it all out there
to
like like work
like
with,
counteract
work with what you have.
Yeah, I do think that's definitely possible. Like my parents have always said like they've always been quite uncomfortable with my openness and always trying to push it, like see how far I can push it and push them in a way because it's like I want to push their thinking and understanding, and like how earlier we were saying like, you know, parents that think that they're like more accepting of queerness and like you being gay than they think they are. That's kind of my parents as well, like kind of trying to push them on those things. So I guess I do kind of like over exaggerate it sometimes, but it's the internal battle is quite interesting. They're like be so outwardly like I don't know, like this, because I feel like sometimes it has also like manifested in like to an extreme. For instance, like my hypersexuality and like being really sexual and like that being a huge like part of my identity for like quite a while, and it was all, I feel like it was all kind of like trying to like
I get you.
No, I'm not this way, like proving like kind of proving it wrong. But yeah, no, it's interesting.
Cycling back to BPD, actually, one interesting thing that's really common with it is hypersexuality.
Yeah, I wanted to mention it earlier because I have read that somewhere.
I mean, I think all essentially it manifests itself in is that like nowadays, at least, I think back then it was like, you know, I would sleep with anyone, but mainly because I was trying to use sex as a form of self-harm. Now it's a lot more like I've just got a high libido and I probably but if I was in a relation, if I had someone consistent as opposed to me just sleeping around, I would probably be a very sexually active relationship, and I would need it to be, because for me physical intimacy is a very important thing, and it's something that I do require. But people often swing from one end to the other as well. So like from having had extreme hypersexuality for a long time, then people switch like mad sexual repulsion, where like just the idea of sex turns them off, where there is this huge, not necessarily sense of shame, but it's like, you know, that kind of like ill feeling after a hookup that you just know you shouldn't have had, or like you know, when you wake up and like the kind of hangover anxiety of, oh, I was such a fucking mess like this. It's like that, but just about everything sexual and long term. And I think for me, that's like, I definitely nearly went there a few years ago where I was
really?
just like,
I didn't know about that. Sorry.
No, because so of course it's just I think with anal, for me, that was a big hang up for like a really, really long time, because it was like, no one teaches you how to do anal. No one teaches you how to do anything. And so I think for a while, I was kind of almost repulsed by it, swinging back from that hypersexuality, especially after like first year of uni where I'd been sleeping around quite a bit. After the diagnosis, for a solid year to like 8 months, I was definitely just completely like, I'm never doing anal again. And the idea, and I don't think it was as much to do with the diagnosis as it was to do with that kind of sexual repulsion. And now it's got to a point where it's like, I don't really care. And for me, my sex life, at least, and surprisingly more common than I thought with queer people, not everyone is constantly doing anal at all times 24/7. Like, and I think this is the one good thing about queer sex compared to straight sex, is that straight sex is very linear in a way. It's kind of like, there is an end, there is a goal. I mean, y'all literally have
there's
bases.
like a script, like
whereas like queer sex is a smorgasbord. Like it's like a little like charcuterie board with like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and like, fine, maybe I don't want like the saucisson today, but like, you know, but I'm still down for some Parma ham. So it's like that. I think you have a lot more flexibility and options with what you can do, and I think, especially like heterosexual sex is so often defined by, you know, penis, vagina, bloop, like, whereas I think queer sex, for me at least, is defined, such a tangent, is defined by intimacy and intensity. And those are the two factors that I used to differentiate between what was sex and what was just me hooking up with someone. And we could be doing the exact same things. But for me, it's about defining it through sex as an act that, for me, is defined through not emotions, but intensity and intimacy. So yeah, I don't know how I got onto that, but yeah.
I feel like it's so intense as well, and that's another thing of like idolizing queer relationships, is that, yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, you have this charcuterie board of like picking and choosing what you feel. It's not just like one set script, but because you have that freedom, it opens up so much room for all this intensity that is like very overwhelming to deal with, especially because you're not primed for those situations by the society that we live in. Like, the society that we live in is very heteronormative, very linear, and then suddenly you have all these options and it's like, oh, what the fuck, like, what is happening?
And I think as well, given, because I think queer people I think queer men have to deal with it in a very similar way that women in general have to deal with, in a way that straight men don't, which is kind of like the body standard, the standard that is put forward to you by the media. And fine, there is that kind of male body like type that is put forward by the media, but it doesn't really affect straight men in the same way that the woman beauty standard affects women. And the way that the queer beauty standard, which is typically, you know, like, not queer, but I would say the gay beauty standard, which is very like 6'4", ripped, muscled, is really shoved into your face by like porn, all of that. And I guess with queer sex it's a bit less of an issue, because when you're getting to that point of having queer sex, you've already had to do a lot more of your own discourse and research. But I think people forget that like sex isn't meant to be this smooth thing. Like sex is awkward. Sex is like the best parts of sex are those moments where you kind of just stop and giggle at each other, because like it's just, like, sex is smelly. Sex isn't this pornographic thing. And I think with queer sex, there's a bit more kind of I don't really know if it is more.
Like there's more room.
Yeah, there's more room for error.
For error. Yeah, that's what. Yeah, I don't know if there is. I wouldn't know. I've never had straight sex.
I mean, yeah, no. I think there's a lot of expectations with straight sex, and it's not pleasant to have to fulfill them for either person involved. But with queer sex, I mean, I guess it's difficult because like my only gay relationship was with someone that I was dating, so that was like, obviously the expectations are kind of lessened at that point, but like the only other person I've had like queer sex with, it was just a lot less expectation, a lot less like this is happening now, this is
Yeah.
happening now. It was just like, whatever happens now, I'll take it, or like not take it. There's no expectation. So
yeah, and in a way, like a lot like less performative. I'm just
Yeah.
like thinking of like my experiences, and I do feel like, well, I don't know, maybe it is also just for me, because I feel like if there's like a woman standing in front of me, it's like I know we have this mutual understanding of what's going on, like
Yeah.
you know that like I don't actually have to moan like that, because you also like you know how it feels. So it's like, you know, and there is this less like, I don't feel like I'm gonna crush your ego if like I don't come for you.
So there's like less expectation from both ends. Would you say?
Yeah,
That-
no, for sure.
That's interesting. I get that though. That makes sense.
Yeah,
I have teaching you about
I-
straight
I-
sex.
oh my god, about straight sex? Am I gonna walk out of here a cisgender man? Fuck no.
Why do you think, well, I don't think there's a right answer for this, but why do you think that there's a lot more of a like hookup culture and casual sex culture and
In
like
queer
for
communities. I think for a couple reasons. One, when any culture is pushed underground, naturally the way in which they like form communities, I mean, I think it's because it's a sexuality that's been oppressed, therefore when you drive that underground and when you have these communities of people that have been driven underground and are willing to explore, it's not that they're necessarily more promiscuous, it's just that in relation to straight heteronormative society, which has been conditioned by thousands of years of sexual oppression. If you look at the Victorians, if you look at everything, when you're breaking apart and forming a new society or a new community, you're not held to those same standards, you're not held to those same expectations, and therefore you can do a lot more, you can explore a lot more. And I think also as well, when you are being oppressed for who you love and you can't openly date and you can't openly get married, sex is the only form of physical connection you have. So I think for those reasons, sex and physical intimacy do play a bigger role in queer communities than they do necessarily in heterosexual communities, because those are the very things for which they have been oppressed, or at least on a sexuality level, not on a gender level. But also then I think there is a greater level of hookup culture around it, and I think that's for a variety of reasons. I think Grindr exists, which is an app that is solely, for sex. I think also the conversations that we have.
But like, for instance, why do you think there's a like Grindr and that works for like gay men, but why is there not like a Grindr for straight people? Like, how has that? I mean, I guess you kind of did already answer, but like, I just think it's so, I don't know. Sorry, carry on.
No, I get what you mean. I just don't think a straight Grindr would work. Just for the simple like already Grindr is a very risky place to be. You're meeting up with someone random from the internet. Realistically, the first time you meet them, like more often than not, I'll leave a Grindr hookup and I'll be like, oh, by the way, what's your name? Kind of thing. Like, it is a certain level of like.
So you think it's also like a male privilege kind of thing in a way?
I think it'd be really dangerous if there was a straight Grindr. I think it would be a lot more risky, because you're already entering a very dangerous situation when there is that kind of safety imbalance of automatic power imbalance that you are putting women at. I think it just wouldn't work. Like, it would just, but also because one or two people get murdered on Grindr, majority of society is gonna be like, all right, whatever. Two, you murdered two white women off a dating app. That dating app's never coming back. And that's the thing. So also, like, society simply would care more. They simply would care more if a cis heterosexual person were to be murdered on a dating app compared to Grindr. But I don't know. It's really interesting as to why sex is more prevalent. But I think also it's because the conversation. There is a lot more conversation around it, and there is a lot more. Because you go speak to your queer friends about these things. You go speak. You don't have the kind of resources that heterosexual people have around them. But yeah, I think there's a big variety of reasons as to why queer circles tend to be more, not necessarily sex based, but also I think a big reason. Sorry, I'm ranting again. Because so many queer people are creatives, work in nightlife. We congregate in situations which are more likely to lead to sex. That's the thing. Because if you take a straight club and you take a gay club, the amount of people who are probably getting laid that night are probably quite similar. But the idea is that where the majority of queer communities exist, it's in nightlife, it's in party culture, and therefore we're automatically placing ourselves, like, we're not going to like a boozy brunch with the mates and we'll just jerk each other off, like it's often like, you know, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We just tend to be in situations which are more conducive to probably getting laid at the end of the night, or
But I think what you said about power imbalance is also really interesting, because I think that's just, again, a lot more conducive to sexual situations. Like, it doesn't feel like with your queer friends or just anyone that's queer, there's a lot less of like explaining that you have to do, and a lot less like meeting in the middle that you have to do. It's just like you're kind of already on a similar plane of existence. Like what we were saying earlier about we were talking about having to disclose that you have herpes to people, and I was saying disclosing to straight people is like a whole journey to get there, but to queer people it's just like, okay, that's already part of their language and conversations that they have with their friends like on a day-to-day basis.
100%. And I think like trying to explain to my straight friends that I've herpes, they're like, oh my god, what? And then I explain to my gay friends, they're like, bitch, you're not special, all of us have it. Like, get the fuck over yourself. And I'm like, thank you guys. But no, it is really true, and we were talking about this. It's that I think because A, we're all relatively well educated, but B, because you guys literally run a sex podcast, the kind of level of discourse and the level of information we're surrounded by, that we have access to, is so much greater than what the average cis straight person, even if they grow up with the same amount of privilege or in the same world as we did, have. And so when I speak to my straight friend, it's kind of weird, A, how uncomfortable they are talking about sex, but B, the way in which they're even able to communicate it is so fundamentally different. They just don't have the same capacity to talk about it, and because they haven't been surrounded by it, our general base level of discourse is so different, and I'm sorry, but it is a lot higher than your average straight person's, just because it's what we've had to do in order to survive and to understand ourselves. When society understands you for you, you don't have to do as much self-introspection or introspection with other people as you would as a queer person, and that's why we are so much more generally comfortable talking about our bodies, talking about sex, but also understanding the discourse between gender and sexuality and stuff like that, because those are the rights that we're fighting for and continue to have to explain to other people. Whereas when it's all laid out for you and it's pretty fucking simple, it actually makes it more restrictive.
To have to to have to like constantly explain something to someone else, you have to have the understanding and like language to be able to do that in the first place.
And it, like, all in the question of how straight people would be like, oh, but like, what do you mean, how do you have sex? And it's like just that question kind of proves it all. It's like you don't even have like
your notion and conception of sex is so
exactly
narrow.
The understanding beyond that to like fathom what any other kind of sex could be, whereas like, as you were saying, this is the kind of stuff that you just know automatically, essentially, by being queer.
And I'm sorry, but how fucking boring. Like, serious. Like, I kind of imagine, like, fine, now I'm just being, like, heterophobic, which isn't a thing. But,
it's fine, it's
like,
fine.
you know that scene of, like, Will and Charlotte from The In-Betweeners, where he's just, like... You know what I'm talking about? Like, do you know the scene I'm talking about?
I haven't watched that.
No, To be fair, that's not what straight sex is.
I know it's not,
like...
but in my head, like, that is just what all straight sex is.
It kind of is, though.
I mean...
It's definitely not, but
it's definitely the exception.
I'm gonna have to defend over
No,
here,
but even, like...
Guys, we're going straight bashing today.
No, because it is, like, the exception to have straight sex that isn't like that. Like... The amount of times I've had straight sex and I've just been like, what was that? But then the like couple of times when it's been some, like, even an inch outside of like the expectations or the prescribed script of like how it should be. I don't know what I'm doing with my hands, but like that is like something to talk about. That's like, oh wow, this man like knew what he was doing.
And I think also in like straight world there seems to be a lot more kink shaming, and I think maybe it's because, and the only real example I have of this, and maybe it's just because we were 16, but I know a friend of mine was seeing a girl and they were into very light BDSM kind of play, and I mean like very baby stage bondage, like you have a couple handcuffs and like a collar and a leash maybe kind of thing, and like the light span, like occasional light spanking, and I remember all of us being like, oh my god, what the fuck, like. kind of really overdoing it. Like, all my straight friends being like, "Oh my god, you're so crazy! Like, you own like a leash and like a collar. Like, that's so fucking wild." And, I'm just like, and they would really kink shame him, and I'm just like looking back, like, what? like why? And like, I think because there is so much more rigidity and still this kind of Victorian notion of sex, that it is something to kind of simultaneously being straight, be really embarrassed about, but also really boast about.
Yeah.
Which is such a weird dichotomy to have. And I think a lot of it is obviously gendered and is largely like misogyny massively factors into it. But the idea that like sex is something that guys are so happy to talk about, or girls even, but are still so ashamed of at the same time, is the biggest inherent contradiction ever.
Yeah.
And whereas I think like for us it's like, guys, just sex, like you haven't gone to space, like it's just sex, babes, calm down. It makes it a lot easier just to talk about it.
Yeah, and honestly, I share every single detail of my sex life because we have a podcast, but like with you, like on our group chat, which is like 3 queer people and 2 straight people, I feel like we are, I mean, not to like shame our straight friends, but I was literally thinking the other day when we were talking about who has the most sex, I was like, I know nothing about your sex lives to this 2 straight people, whereas like you and Will, I know every single detail of your sex lives.
Yeah, no, that's true.
And you know everything that's going on with my vagina at all times.
I think that's so good. That's amazing. All my straight friends at Kabir overshare because I'll be like, he threw me back and I basically got concussed or something. And I'll be like, Kabir, that's disgusting. And I'm like, fun. I get it. Like, it is TMI for like a lot of people.
But it's so fun.
No, it's fucking not. It's fucking entertaining, guys. Yeah. Like, this is good content.
Yeah.
Okay. And my straight friends like, oh my god, no, I don't want to hear about your sex life. But then I can hear them kind of be like, oh my god, don't tell me, but also tell me about it. But also, I know it. Like, do you know what I mean? And it's just like and it's so weird because like having them like talk about their sex life, it's just like yeah, so I've been seeing like it's just really bland stuff, and I'm not like vanilla shaming either. It's just
just get into the juice. Like
yeah.
I don't care about
the details.
Yeah, exactly.
I want the juicy, dirty details. What are all these hang-ups about talking about it? I get all the hang-ups about talking about it. It's only from being forced to have to explore it at the levels that we've had to, that we are now this comfortable.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like,
let's just have
exactly.
just have some fun.
I loved what you said earlier about like through being oppressed, essentially, like you just become more free about it because you just like get to go away from the main society and the main way of thinking and like think a little bit outside the box.
There's a lot of freedom when you're not holding yourself to a standard or a norm. Except the only problem is it's really difficult because the entire way we have these conversations are in relation to the societal norms. So it's like, even still, I'll find myself being like, I'm uncomfortable to wear this or that because it's maybe a bit too feminine, or I don't have the right body type for it because I've what's internalized what cis heteronormative society, or even cis homosexual society, has indoctrinated into me. And it's like, even when we're talking about like the promiscuous question, our level of comparison is only cis heteronormative, is the cis heteronormative standard. And so it's really difficult trying to find a place within the system because we know the system is fundamentally broken. And like, I'm a big like, we need to like, even on a like systemic level, we need to just tear apart everything and start again.
Yeah.
And I think we need to do the same with how we talk about sex and gender and sexuality. I think it's impossible just because of the way society is set up at this moment in time to talk about it without it being in relation to that cis heteronormative standard. You know what I mean?
A little bit of Foucault in there.
Oh my god.
We're literally just like quoting
I just graduated with a philosophy degree. I don't ever think about that shit ever again.
But that is literally all that we're talking about. Like right now, fully word for word. But like it is, everyone should go read some Foucault if they haven't. But like, that is literally what he says, is like, there isn't really a way that we can talk about sex right now because every way that we talk about sex is going to be related to like
to the
norm
standard.
of sex,
exactly.
and that it can never be revolutionary, even if we think that we're being revolutionary. And like I've really grappled with this with our podcast of like, are we like, what the fuck are we doing? Are we even doing anything? Of like, can we talk about it in any way that is like pushing the boundaries of you get what I'm saying, of normativity. It's really tricky.
But like also like it's just two human beings, maybe more than two, but it's just human beings at the end of the day. Like there's only so revolution. Like unless I'm about to grow like a third knob, or a second knob first, like a second or a third. I don't know where the second one came from. But unless I'm about to grow like a second knob and like like a clit on my knee, nothing I can do is gonna be that revolutionary.
Yeah.
Like,
there's only so much we can do.
Exactly.
And I feel like the more we're exposed to it, the more it can start to push the boundaries. But for us to even to get to that point, we have to like just talk about it no matter what it is.
Exactly.
But I don't know how the fuck we got it.
I don't know how we got it. I feel like listening back on this, you're just gonna be like tangent off tangent. Fuck up, bitch.
No. Maybe we should like bring it back to the original topic of like.
So I'm really mentally ill.
Just like a little, I don't know, maybe a little summary and reflection of like, I don't know, I'm kind of interested if you were to get into a relationship now.
Yeah, how would it be different?
Yeah, what would you want it to look like? Like, considering everything we've talked about, BPD and queerness.
I think I would want it, like I said, to be with someone who has an understanding of their own gender and a willingness to play with it. Whether they, on their day-to-day, is a super masculine, muscly guy, whether it's like a super femme, twinky kind of guy, or them, or whatever, in either situation. I would want them to be someone who's just very comfortable with toying with those ideas of gender. I'm not entirely sure whether I'd want it to be monogamous or not. But I think for me, what would be really important is that it would have to be with someone who's like one of my best friends first. It would have to be with someone who I have that kind of rapport with and that I have that kind of connection with before it becomes romantic, because at least then it prevents me from becoming obsessive. It prevents me from going crazy. I need to know and understand that person in the same way that I need them to know and understand me, and so I like it needs to be something that emotionally is supportive, because I'm a very emotional person. So I'm not looking for someone to be my mum and my dad. Like I'm not looking for someone to sit I can very much look after myself. But I want someone who I can openly be like, hey, I just need a little bit of reassurance right now. I want, I think I want what everyone wants, which is just clear, open lines of communication, trust, and a lot of like reciprocal love. Yeah. I think ultimately beyond that, and someone who can who's like good at like sucking dick and cooking food, but other than that, I think that's it. And I think the thing is for me now, when I look at relationships, the real question that I'm asking, and I'm not currently dating or even actively trying. Well, we're going to set up my dating profile after this, so in about 10 minutes I will be trying to actively date. But I think for me now, what I'm really interested in figuring out though, is that with my relationships is whether I want monogamy or whether I would want something open. And that's kind of that's what I'm really questioning, because I think for so long I was very much like, I just want monogamy, I just want like a solid relationship, and I've not even had that. Like I've not even had like a proper like long-term date. I sleep around, I don't really date around. And I kind of want to start dating because it seems a lot more fun than just sleeping around. But like it sounds like also a lot more headache and like see, because at least like with like sex, it's a lot less like I get a lot less freaked out about it. I think dating's the scary part for me. Sex isn't really the scary part for me. Yeah. So I think for me, I just want someone who's understanding. But yeah, I think exploring whether I want monogamy or whether I want something open is something I'm still yet to do. Yeah. And it's still something that I'm not really sure on, because I really enjoy. I enjoy the company of people. I enjoy, flirting with people, games, like kiss the cute boy at the club, go home, blah blah blah. That's all fun and games. But at the same time, I think if I had consistency both in my sex life, both in my emotional life, I realistically probably wouldn't want an open relationship in the way that I currently think that I do. Yeah. So I think for me, it's still a learning curve, and it's a massive learning curve. But yeah.
That's exciting though.
Yeah.
Something to,
look forward to.
Exactly. There are so many things to explore.
Exactly.
Yeah. But
yeah.
Great.
I think we should wrap up because we've
talked
about a lot.
Talked about everything.
Yeah. But thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing
Thank you for
so
having
much of
me.
your
This
thoughts.
was so much fun.
It was so fun.
I feel like we're gonna have to record a part 2 at some time.
Yeah, we have so much to say. We'll do like notes on queerness, notes on monogamy.
Please.
Just like as you figure out
little
what you
tangent.
want.
Come every 6 months, guys. I've had a new epiphany about my sex.
Yeah, we can do bonus episodes called like Tangents with Kabir.
Oh. Please, that'd be so much fun. Anyway, thank you guys so much for having me on. This has been so much fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, you guys know where to find us on Instagram at Sextras Podcast, Facebook Sextras Podcast, our website that was too many W's. sextraspodcast.com, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
You've been listening to Sextras, presented by Honey Jane Wyatt and Maria Jose Hayodatiyi, produced by Mabel Productions.